I know how annoying it is when reviewers get a new product and they're just immediately like, oh, this is my new daily driver. New daily driver, new daily driver, new daily driver, new daily driver. Seems like some reviewers get a new daily driver pretty much every time a new product releases. Radiomaster is making it awful hard for me. You see, I switched to the Radiomaster Boxer a little over a year ago, maybe even 2 years. I'm not sure how long it's been, but I've had the Radiomaster Boxer for a long time. And that's why I think you guys are going to be okay if I decide that the Radiomaster GX12 is my new daily driver. And I'm not saying it's going to be, but it is real freaking tempting. This radio ticks so many boxes. And I'm thinking hard. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. You're going to learn if it's your new daily driver. The first thing that makes the Radiomaster GX12 so desirable is its form factor. People are always looking for more compact radios that fit easier in their backpack and are easier to transport, but without compromising ergonomics. A lot of the people who want a smaller radio are going to a gamepad style radio like the Radiomaster Zorro. And of the gamepad style radios, I feel like the Zorro does the best job of preserving the ergonomics of a larger radio without giving up, without too many compromises. But still, like, for example, the batteries on the Zorro are really small. The battery life is really terrible. And personally, I just don't find that it fits my hand and works really well, especially because I use a hybrid pinch style versus a thumbing style. I think the people who like gamepad style radios usually are into thumbing. So the Radiomaster GX12 has similar ergonomics to something like the Radiomaster Boxer. It fits in the hand in a similar way, but it's slightly smaller. Well, not really. I mean, if you look at them side by side, you can see that the GX12 is smaller, but then once you add in the screen, it's kind of the same height. So it does seem like it's going to take up less space and fit easier into a backpack. But when you hold it in your hands, it still fits really nicely. And yes, that's even true for somebody like me who does hybrid pinch. Even with my index finger and thumb on the gimbals, I can get to all the edges of the gimbal. I don't feel like the radio is insecure, and the ergonomics just really work pretty well. The next thing that makes the GX12 stand out is these antennas. And no, I don't mean that they're folding antennas, although I love that they're folding antennas. I found the factory antenna on my Radiomaster Boxer so annoying that I 3D printed and modified a folding Radiomaster Pocket antenna onto it, and I really like that. No, what makes the GX12's antennas so interesting is that they are dual band antennas. You see, this is a Gemini radio, and we'll talk a little bit more about what Gemini is later in the video. But the short version of the story is that this radio can do both 900 megahertz, which gives increased signal penetration and increased range due to the lower frequency, and 2.4 gigahertz, which gives lower latency, but at slightly reduced range. So if you're somebody who likes to do mountain cruising one day or real bando bashing, you need a lot of penetration to get through the concrete walls of the bando, and then you go out and you race and you want the lowest possible latency, this radio can do it all without having to put an extra module in the back or any nonsense like that. And that is pretty freaking exciting. But what if you don't like the built-in antennas? And it's probably true that the small dual-band antennas that are built into the radio aren't going to give you as good a range as a dedicated antenna, an antenna made specifically for 900 megahertz versus 2.4 gigahertz. And you could even have high-gain antennas if you're doing really long-range stuff that focus the beam down into a narrow cone. Fortunately, the GX12 has these ports here, and although there is nothing in there, you can get an SMA pigtail and you can mount it in there and you can plug it into a UFL connector on the PCB and you can have your own external antennas here instead of the built-in antennas. Very thoughtful Radiomaster. The Radiomaster GX12, like pretty much all FPV-focused radios today, and certainly all Radiomaster radios, runs the EdgeTX operating system. And for those who are new to the hobby and to EdgeTX, it's kind of like saying that a computer runs Microsoft Windows. If I put you in front of a Windows computer and you know how to use a Windows computer, it kind of doesn't matter who makes the computer. You're going to basically know how to do what you need to do. The same is true for Mac OS or Android or iOS. And EdgeTX is kind of like that. Any EdgeTX radio, when you power it up, you're going to learn something today. Well, I've customized the startup sound on that one. But at the end of the day, any EdgeTX radio that you power up is going to have pretty much the same menus and the same functions and capabilities. And that's why when we get into a review like this, we're not really going to talk about the capabilities of the operating system. How many channels does it support? How many mixers does it have? Is it programmable? The short version is that EdgeTX can do pretty much any dang thing that you want it to do. It can jump through hoops if you want it to do, and it can do all the basic things that you expect an RC controller to do. There is a little bit of a learning curve with EdgeTX, and that's why I've actually made an EdgeTX 101 video playlist. There's maybe 5 or 7 videos in it now getting you through basic configuration, and it may be more in depth than some people are looking for, but it may be just the right amount of depth. I would recommend you check it out if you're getting to this radio, or even if you're experienced in EdgeTX, you probably learn a few things. There's a link to that playlist down in the video description below. As well, I'll put a little pop-out card up in the corner if you want to check that out. So we won't be diving into the capabilities of the operating system because that's the same for all of these radios, and that's not going to be what steers you towards this radio versus any of the others. The screen on this radio is a black and white screen similar to the Radiomaster Boxer, and I think it even has the same resolution. It's not a super high resolution screen. You are going to be dealing with text. I should show you the GX12, not the Boxer. You are going to be dealing with text. You're not going to have graphics like on the Jumper T15 with a color touchscreen or the Radiomaster TX16S with a color touchscreen. That simpler interface, to me, it's fine. I actually kind of in some ways find the color touchscreen to be overkill, although when I had a radio with it, I kind of enjoyed it. So it's 50-50 to me. This is definitely not a reason to stay away from the radio unless you just love big color images and big complicated color screens. Nice thing about the Radiomaster GX12 is that this is an OLED screen. It is not an LCD screen. And that means it's going to be much more visible in the sunlight. There's an issue with these screens where, depending on the brightness and so forth, they can be a little bit difficult to see under some lighting conditions. This one is not going to be like that. By the way, that scrolling that you see there, that's just an artifact of my camera. You don't see that in real life, but I'm not going to adjust my camera's shutter speed to try to deal with that. The controls on the Radiomaster GX12 are more full-featured than those on the Radiomaster Boxer, but not quite as many switches and knobs as the Radiomaster TX16S. We have 4 switches here, and they are all 3-position switches, although they can be swapped out for 2-position switches. For example, I like to have an arm-disarm switch here, and I like it to be a 2-position switch. And Radiomaster ships with the radio 2-position switches with little plugs on them that can be swapped up. You do have to open up the radio, but you can swap those out. And I freaking love this. I hate it when I get a radio and it's got 3-position switches where I wish there were 2 positions or vice versa. We can customize these to be however we need them to be. I'm going to show you how to do that, but I'm going to put that in a separate video, and I'll link that in the video description below, because if this is going to be my daily driver, I'm going to have to modify this. I don't know for a fact that it's going to be my daily driver, but I'm definitely going to give it a run. Wish I could get it in hot pink. In addition to the 3-position switches, we have 2 momentary switches, and unlike the giant momentary switches on the Boxer, these are relatively subtle. They're fairly small, and we can get up there and press them. I could imagine maybe pressing them by accident. They kind of protrude a little bit. They're not recessed, and if I hold this in my hands, like I can feel them. Probably wouldn't, but they're very light pressure. They're not really clicky or anything. There's no like little indentation as you press it in. I think there's more of a risk of accidentally clicking it than like something like this, which you're really not going to do by accident. But it's probably not a big deal. And then we have these 2 sliders, and this is something that I really appreciate. On the Boxer, we have these 2 knobs, which, by the way, if we look at the front of the GX12, we also have the 2 knobs there, but we have these 2 sliders that fall under your finger. And so, for example, for something like an airplane with flaps that you want to lower or adjust, or more importantly, for an aircraft that is a gimbal, where you want to be able to adjust the gimbal up and down, this is an absolute lifesaver. I love it. Freaking love it. Oh, they feel nice too. They have a nice click indentation at the center, a nice strong click, and then while you're moving them, they feel smooth. They feel very damped. Very nice. good potentiometers there. Now, those sliders are going to be controversial for some people because there's going to be people out there who have no freaking use for them and don't like that when they rest their finger right here, it's resting right on this slider. And instead of a nice solid surface, well, number one, they've just got these indentations under their finger. And number two, they've got this movable thing. People didn't like the sliders on the Zorro so much that they actually 3D printed a cover that just literally covered up the slider so that you could rest your finger there and not have the slider underneath it. Radiomaster took heed. You can actually remove this faceplate, and they ship with the radio replacement faceplates that just remove the slider. You're just going to physically unscrew it, unplug it. In software, you can turn it off, I guess, and you're going to replace it with this faceplate. Again, just really, Radiomaster is really thinking about what their customers want and giving them all the options. Well, probably not all the options, but giving them options, and I freaking love it. On the front of the radio, we have two more switches. They are also momentary switches, and I guess how would you use those? Like if I'm flying, I guess I could take my hand off the stick momentarily. Could I push it like that? I don't know. It's a little... I think those, to me, would be more for something I would use when I wasn't flying. Like, it's really easy to just get your thumb up here and push these. But if I was in position like this, they're just not that accessible. Even if I move my index finger up here, it's kind of a weird angle to get to. So I'm not so sure about those. We'll probably find a use for them. And it's always nice to have more switches, I guess. In addition, we have these switches down here. And these don't work like you might think they would. Unless you've owned a jumper like a T-Lite or a T-Pro, these buttons on every other Radiomaster radio have basically been a slider. They're essentially go from all the way down to all the way up, and that's it. So here's all the way down, and now we are turning that slider to the right, and now the slider's all the way up. But Jumper was the first to release a radio with a more customizable set of 6-position buttons. And Radiomaster has now followed along. This is the first Radiomaster radio that does this. So what we can do is we can configure these switches however we want them to be. So right now, you can see it is set up like it's a single 6-position array. And we can have one of them active at a time. So it's working exactly like before, which is kind of nice for backwards compatibility. But if we go in the menu and we go down to customize, that's annoying. Hold on. First, I'm going to turn the volume off. Again, if you want to know more about configuring the radio and stuff, go check out my EdgeTX playlist. All the information you need about like actually using the frickin' radio is in that playlist. We go down in the setup screen to the customizable switches, and we can define for each of the switches like how the switch interacts with the other switches, and even colors, a separate color for when it's on versus when it's off. So let's take switch number 1, and let's change switch number 1 from being in group 1 to being in group 2. And now you'll see that switches 2 through 6 work as before, but notice that when I manipulate switches 2 through 6, switch number 1 stays the same. Switch number 1 is now a separate two-way toggle. We basically have another toggle switch, whereas switches 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are a 5-switch group in which one of those switches can be enabled at a time. And I could take switch number 2 and put it into group 2. And now switches 1 and 2 are in a group with each other, and I can select one of them or the other, or I can select none of them. You see that there I've turned switch 2 off. Switch 1 precludes switch 2 precludes switch 1, and then I can turn them off. And the same with switches 3, 4, 5, and 6, which are now in a group with each other. Although it looks like switches 3, 4, 5, and 6 I can't turn off. The configuring of the customizable switches has always been a little bit of a bugaboo for me. And in fact, I think that might be the next video I make in my EdgeTX tutorial series, so I could freaking take the time to figure out all the ins and outs. But the bottom line is that now these 6-position switches are much more versatile. You can have 6 individual toggles. You can have a group of 3 where you can go 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. You can have another group of 3. You can have any combination of those things, and you can customize the colors to be exactly how they want, which I know we all freaking like because we all love customizable colors. Before we continue with the video, I'd like to remind you that the single best way for you to help make sure that I am able to continue making content like this, which hopefully you value, is to join my Patreon. Patreon is a website where you subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month. That's the minimum amount, just $2 a month. Someone's vacuuming. But join my Patreon, get access to my Discord server, and just feel good about supporting the work that I do here. If you watch my content regularly, then hopefully eventually you'll come to a point where you go, this guy's earned my support. If today is that day, join my Patreon at any level, at any dollar value that you pick. $2, pick $5, pick $10, pick whatever amount you think is fair for the amount of value you get out of my content. There's a link down below where you can click through. And if today's not the day, if you're like, I just want to watch the video, you've probably already skipped ahead. But yeah, keep watching the content. I'll keep making the content, and I hope that day comes. So the radio's got a bunch of switches and knobs, and they're fairly customizable. What about the gimbals? And you're either going to care about the gimbals or you're not. And there are definitely people out there, myself among them, who say it kind of doesn't matter. Even like the worst gimbals that Radiomaster makes are still plenty good. But these are not the worst gimbals that Radiomaster makes. The gimbals in the Radiomaster GX12 are full metal CNC gimbals. That means that this frame and all the parts, the interior parts of the gimbal, are made from CNC'd metal, and that means that the gimbal is more solid, it has more weight and heft, and just gives the radio more of a premium feel. Does that really matter? I don't know, it's up to you, but it is nice to, like, you pick the radio up and you go, oh, it's solid, it feels good. But functionally speaking, the CNC metal gimbal means that you get less flex. And so especially when you push the stick all the way to the end point, the end points are more precise. And no, this is not going to turn you from a good pilot into a bad pilot or a bad pilot into a good pilot. It's just a little, I like to say that it's like leather upholstery in a car. Doesn't make you drive better. It just makes you really happy to be sitting in the car. And that's how the AG01 gimbals have been. Now, these are not AG01 gimbals because Radiomaster have done something novel with the sensor for these gimbals. You see, all of these gimbals use what's called a Hall sensor, which is a magnetic sensor that detects the position of the gimbal. And the nice thing about a Hall sensor is that it doesn't have any like physical moving parts. There are ball bearings in the gimbal, but the actual sensing mechanism that detects the position is completely contact-free, and that means it never wears out. Unlike potentiometer gimbals that over time will wear out, eventually the gimbal will not recenter correctly, it will not read, it'll have a bunch of jitter and drift, and you'll have to replace it. Hall sensor gimbals basically last forever as long as you don't get a bunch of dirt and gunk in them and make them feel bad, but as far as their precision, they're basically as good as they are on their last day as they are on their first day. But Radiomaster have done something, and I think it's kind of controversial. What they've done is they have placed the Hall sensor for this gimbal not inside the gimbal itself, but on the circuit board below the gimbal. And there's a magnet on the gimbal. So the Hall sensor is here, the magnet is floating above the Hall sensor, and as you deflect the gimbal, the magnet moves around and the Hall sensor detects the change in magnetic field and detects the gimbal's position. And the reason they've done this is supposed to be that it makes the gimbal shallower and therefore makes the radio thinner. But I gotta say, it doesn't, because if you compare this to the Radiomaster Boxer, it's basically the same thickness, so I'm kind of not sure why they did it. I'm sure they had a good reason, and I'm just failing to understand it. But the reason I don't like this decision is that the TBS Tango did this years ago. And TBS Tango gimbals have a lot of problems with calibration. They are constantly going out of calibration. They are very sensitive to temperature changes. It's a pain in the ass. I know people who use the TBS Tango in their daily life, and they're constant, like sometimes several times a week, the gimbals will go out of calibration and they'll have to recalibrate the damn thing. Now, we don't know whether that will be true for the Radiomaster GX12. This is not a TBS Tango. Radiomaster may have implemented this better than TBS did, but it gave me a huge amount of pause when I heard that they'd done this, because I know it hasn't worked well for the TBS Tango 2. Another cool thing about these gimbals is that if you pull up on them, and you have to pull up with more force than I realized. The first time I did it, I just thought this didn't work, and then I and then it popped up and now it's fine. If you pull up on them, they actually fold. They fold over. And credit to TBS Team Black Sheep. The TBS Tango 2 Pro was the first to do this, at least the first I'm aware of. This is one of the cases where you could absolutely claim that Radiomaster has just completely ripped off TBS. I don't know, did TBS take it from somewhere else? I don't know, but if you're into folding gimbals, which like protect them from damage when you put them into your backpack, that is pretty freaking cool. And unlike the TBS Tango gimbals, when you fold them, they seem like they actually freaking stay folded. I don't know about you, but on my Tango, if you just tweedle it the tiniest bit, boing, it pops up again. Okay, that sounded wrong. Another thing you give up with these gimbals on the GX12 is the adjustment screws. On the AG01, the adjustment screws are in the front of the gimbal, and these adjustment screws let you adjust gimbal tension. They let you adjust travel up and down. You do have to get into the back of the radio to adjust the throttle centering if you want to make the throttle not center or change from mode 1 to mode 2. On the GX12, these are accessible from the back of the radio, and the nice thing is that we can get at the throttle as well. Is that what this is? T for throttle? What if I want to put the throttle on the other side? Interesting. You can make a centering throttle, but if you change it from mode 2 to mode 1, there's no hole on the other side to adjust the throttle, so you have to open the radio up. Oh well, not the end of the world. We can get at these screws from the back of the radio with relatively little hassle, but it is kind of nice to have them on the front with the H01. Yeah, getting these back in place is a little bit of a hassle. How often are you going to adjust the gimbals anyway? Here at the top of the radio, we have an intake for the fan that cools the Radiomaster Gemini module inside this radio. And that is a 1-watt module. It is not the most powerful module that has ever existed. There have been some 2-watt ExpressLRS modules in the past. Well, they had a 1-watt rating, and then you could unlock them and overdrive them to 2 watts. This guy is probably going to stay at 1 watt, and we don't have to worry about cooling. Number one, because we can just see there's the fan here. But number two, because the ExpressLRS development team has a requirement for a heat soak test where you basically leave the module powered up at full power for like an hour, and then you measure the output power, and it needs to be stable over that time. We can assume that Radiomaster, who this is not their first go-around, has successfully passed that test, and we're going to have adequate cooling to keep full power to our module even under maybe potentially like hot environmental conditions and so forth. As long as we're looking at the top of the radio, we can also see that there is a headphone jack if you want to like wear headphones and have audio callouts in your ear. And there is a trainer port here if you're doing buddy box, which is something that a lot of people in the quadcopter world don't do. But it's also useful if you want to do a head tracker where you have a gimbal with a camera and you move your head and the gimbal moves with you. You need a buddy box port to do that, and this radio does have one. Also, we have the USB port, and unlike other Radiomaster radios, this USB port is used both for charging and for connecting to the computer. Radios like the Boxer have a port on top for connecting to the computer and a port on bottom for charging. Finally, Radiomaster have gotten with the program and just given you a single USB port. And this is convenient, number one, because like, let's say you're using this radio with your computer to play the FPV simulator. It can plug into your computer and act like a joystick. All EdgeTX radios can do that. It's nice to have the USB port coming out the top, right? So it's not sticking into your lap. And it's nice to be able to charge the radio while you're playing the game so that you don't have to run your batteries down. Sounds like my laundry's done. Hold on a second. I'll be right back. So the GX12 has an internal ExpressLRS Gemini module that can do ExpressLRS in both 2.4 gigahertz and 900 megahertz. But that may not be everything that you need. What if you've got quadcopters with Crossfire receivers in them, FreeSky receivers, or maybe even Immersion RC Ghost receivers? There are other control links out there that you might want access to. For that reason, the GX12 has an external module bay on the back, and you can plug any of those modules in here and use those protocols if you want to. Although I think a lot of people are just going to be settled into the ExpressLRS ecosystem and be happy without using this. The main thing I think people are going to use this for is, well, if you have older quadcopters that you haven't shifted over to ExpressLRS yet and you want to keep using those. But if you had to buy a module anyway, would you just buy new receivers? I don't know. I guess that's a personal decision. As far as batteries go, the GX12 comes from the factory with this 18650 battery tray. You can see that mine has 18650 batteries in it, but I think that's just because I'm a reviewer and they wanted to do me a solid. If you look at the product pages, it shows the tray and the tray is empty. So assume you're going to have to either have these, you might own them already, or you're going to have to buy them. You can also put I believe it's 5,000 or 6,000 milliamp hour lithium polymer battery pack in here. Not the 6200, must be the 5000. You can put a 5000 milliamp hour lithium polymer battery in here, and that's going to get you way more battery life. This is probably 3,000-ish, maybe 3,500 milliamp hours on these 18650s. So it's going to get you significantly more battery life, and I think it's money well spent. Although, maybe you don't fly that long anyway, and it doesn't matter. It's your call. Now, normally, this is where I would show you the SD card that stores the radio's operating system data and tell you that the SD cards that come with these radios are generally cheap garbage that eventually fail and you have to replace them. It's a pain in the ass. But, Radiomaster have done another thing that technically Jumper was the first to do, credit where credit's due. Instead of an SD card, there's 512 meg of flash memory soldered onto the circuit board. And that saves you all of the hassle of like, my SD card reader crapped out and it can't my radio reset and it won't work. It does mean that in order to move data on and off of the radio, you will have to use this USB port. The old tactic of pulling the SD card out of the radio and putting it into a card reader to get faster transfer speeds isn't going to be possible. But that's a trade-off that I think a lot of people are going to be willing to make. I can't tell you how many 32 gig SD cards I have sitting around in these radios because the 512 meg one that came from the factory died and I needed a replacement. And it's super annoying when the SD card craps out in the middle of the field and your radio just won't work. It's been a major weak link of these radios forever, and it's nice that people are finally moving away from them. Do you need more than 512 meg? No, you almost certainly don't, unless you're just going to have a ton of audio files or something. You really don't. I've been telling you that the GX12 has a Gemini module in it, but I haven't really told you what that means. I told you that it means that the radio supports both 2.4 gigahertz for lower latency and 900 megahertz for longer range. But there's more to it than that. Gemini modules don't just do dual band transmission. They also support the ability to transmit packets multiple times. So that we could take the two radios that are inside the GX12 and we could put them both on 2.4 gigahertz. And now instead of sending each packet once, we're sending it twice, and that improves the odds that the packets will get through. In other words, it means you get better link quality in the face of interference or at the edge of range where you would see LQ start dropping and you get closer to a failsafe. Instead, you're going to get higher LQ for longer. You'll get some increased range. I've got a whole video about what is Gemini from when it first came out, from the very first Gemini thing that I reviewed. And I'm going to put a link to that in the video description below if you want more details. And the short version is that Gemini gives you increased link quality in the face of interference and at the edge of range. And we've also got the crossband functionality, and I'm going to put a link in the video description to my review of the Radiomaster Nomad module, which was the first Gemini crossband module I reviewed. Suffice it to say that this radio does all of that stuff. If we look here in the ExpressLRS Lewis script, we can see packet rates in low band, that's 900 megahertz, packet rates all the way up to 200 hertz. And if we keep going the other direction, we've got 500 hertz, 2.4 gig, full 250, etc. We've got all the options. Basically, this is a Swiss Army knife ExpressLRS radio. It can do almost anything that you would want it to do, from low latency to ultra long range. And it supports the new Mavlink functionality for those who are doing long range birds with ArduPilot. ExpressLRS has new functionality where it's optimized for Mavlink transmission, and it can actually do Mavlink transmission over the full range of distances that ExpressLRS uses with actually usable packet rates, unlike some other Mavlink radios that I'm not going to name. Now, in just a second, I'm going to tell you the price of this radio, and I think you're going to be surprised. But before I do that, I need to tell you that if that price agrees with you and you decide to buy it, there are links in the video description below where you can pick the radio up. And it means a lot to me when you click those links because they are affiliate links. When you click that link and then you make any purchase at the affiliated vendor, I get a commission. I get a little cut of it. It doesn't cost you anything extra. They just kick a little money my way. So it's the easiest way for you to support the channel is to find my affiliate links below my videos, click the link, go to the store. Whenever you don't have to buy the radio. You can buy whenever you're buying anything. Just click one of my affiliate links, head over to the store, let them know I sent you. And it's a simple way to support the channel. You can even bookmark the link and it doesn't even take you any extra time. This radio is $170, and that's more than some people would be willing to pay. You can certainly get cheaper radios like the Radiomaster Pocket as low as $60. But I think for what you get, it's pretty freaking compelling. You get the full Gemini dual band, you get the form factor, you get all the controls. It's a pretty compelling package. But I do think you have to compare it against something like the Radiomaster Boxer Crush. The Radiomaster Boxer Crush is similar in form factor. I think not quite as nice in terms of the controls. I think the switch layout on the GX12 is better, especially with the flexibility. The Radiomaster Boxer Crush is $190, and you get the full AG01 gimbals. And I do think the AG01 gimbals feel just that little. Do they feel $20 nicer? I think they do. Maybe it's just the stick ends. Maybe we could just move the stick ends over here. And do they even have the same size stick end? I don't know. Maybe with like a little adjustment to the tension and a little adjustment to the stick ends, we could get them. No, they're not even the same size screw. Damn. The AGO ones are just a little bit nicer. And I don't think that would make me switch to the Boxer from the GX12 just for the gimbals. But I do think that if you're like not entirely swayed by the GX12's form factor and controls, and you're kind of tempted towards the AG01 gimbals, spending $20 more for the Boxer. Hey, it's also available in cool colors. Spending $20 more for the Boxer Crush is probably worth it. But you're not going to get dual band. You're not going to get 900 megahertz and 2.4 gigahertz crossband. The GX12 is, especially at a price of $170, really a leading contender in EdgeTX in ExpressLRS radios today. It really is just a Swiss Army knife, and it's going to be perfect for so many people. But what if you really want that cool color touchscreen? You got to check out my review of the Jumper T15, because that is a Boxer-sized radio with a big color touchscreen, and that may be something you're interested in. I'll put a card on screen and a link in the video description below to where you can pick that up, as well as here's a card on screen to my EdgeTX tutorial. I'll see you there.